is Doug Kazinian. I'm sorry if I misspelled your name or your last name. And he is he's the Human Resources Director of Employee Relationships and Performance. And the topic that he's going to be introducing is rights and responsibilities during pregnancy regarding Family Medical Leave Act, or FML. After him, Shanna Peterson, she's the coordinator of remedies and measures from the Office of Equity. She's not present in the webinar with us, but she sent us a video, so we're going to be playing it. It's going to last like 20 minutes. Then we're going to have Alisa Mangrad. She's the manager of research, safety, and I'm sorry for that, and industrial hygiene from the Department of Environmental Health and Safety. And she's going to be talking about occupational health and chemical safety, reproductive health hazards. Thank you so much for being present today, too. And we are going to have also Greg McGrew. He's a research instructor from bioengineering, and he's going to be talking about ergonomics. So with all that being said, I'm going to start recording the webinar right now because I forgot. And you can take it away from me, Doug. Thank you for being here.
Well, Evelyn, thank you. And appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody today. My presentation will be on a little more than FML because there are a number of intertwining policies and procedures. So I've got a PowerPoint I'm going to bring up on the screen. I hope it's okay if I share that screen. And it is here. Can everybody see that?
Yes,
yeah,
but you might need to put it in presentation mode.
Yes.
There you go. That's perfect.
Is it in presentation mode now?
No, I need to click that icon.
It won't let me. Well, there we go. Can you see that? Yes? No? No? Oh boy. Was that in presentation mode for you folks?
No, that was not.
No, because I don't know that I haven't figured out how to do that in presentation mode in Zoom yet. Sorry. And does anybody have a suggestion? No. Okay. Let's just move through in this mode then. I hope that's okay. So obviously, yes.
Yes, yeah, that's okay. Mm-hmm. You can see this.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So one of the first things that an individual will do in a pregnancy situation, either prepartum, postpartum, will take sick leave. So I don't know if I need to kind of go over that a lot, but that is certainly a right of the individual to take sick leave for issues related to care and health prior and post partum. Then we move into we have got I want to emphasize our university distributing these slides to folks for distribution, so you can utilize these.
Hi, Doug. I have also totally lost the audio. Can you hear us? Well, seems that we might have lost Doug for now. Probably he has a problem. Okay, he's back. So let's give him some time. Hi, Doug. We're happy you're back.
Doug, you're muted, I think.
There we go. Sorry for the glitches. So the parental leave policy that the university has entitles an individual to 160 hours of paid leave for the birth, adoption, or foster care of a child. And eligibility includes 12-month faculty, 12-month research faculty, and university staff. So this is a really great benefit, right, that an individual has that was put in place in the summer of 2018. So a couple of years, a little over 2 years ago. We recognize the need to stay competitive as an employer in the marketplace to be able to offer this. So quite pleased to be able to do that. Eligibility for this is a 50% or greater appointment. Individual needs to be employed for 12 months with the university. And if there's a percentage of appointment that's less than 100, those available hours, those 160 hours are prorated. How that's taken, the 160 hours is taken in a continuous block of time at any point in the 12 months following the qualifying event. Actually, I will say that this has been modified since that time, so we'll delete that. But it does need to be taken in a continuous block at any point in the 12 months. And then the parental leave policy actually is a 6-month entitlement if taken as a block. So while it's a 6-month entitlement, it's like FML in that it's an unpaid kind of period, but individuals are allowed to take it. And so the 160 hours would be taken at some point, and then that leaves an additional 5 months of that leave eligibility for the parental leave. I hope that's clear. So that's kind of above and beyond what we see as mandated by the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. It's a very nice benefit here at the university. If taken intermittently, it's got to be completed within 12 months. And so that that's kind of a separate kind of negotiated situation where an individual, if they want to take it on an intermittent basis, there's no entitlement to it, but it has to be completed within 12 months. Holidays aren't counted as part of those 160 hours. This does run concurrently with FML. So at the beginning of the period of leave, there are several things that start. Parental leave starts, the family medical leave period starts, sick leave starts. And also, I'll get to this later, but there's a short-term disability benefit that the university offers that also a period, the waiting period before that kicks in would start as well. I'll get to that in a little bit. So then, as mentioned, concurrently, family medical leave starts. Again, this is an unpaid but job protected leave. There's no pay associated with that. The pay component comes from any sick and annual leave, and of course the paid leave that the university provided for that 160 hours is in there as well. So that's a nice thing to have. Qualifications for family medical leave. Employee must have at least 1 year of service and 1,250 hours in the last year. I will say that faculty on 12-month appointments are deemed to have met the 1,250 hour requirement. This period is a 480-hour period in a rolling calendar year. Again, can be taken intermittently if negotiated with the unit. So there's a right as a block of time, and if there's a medical need, can be taken intermittently, or on a negotiated basis can be taken intermittently. So the leave part of that is a CU process. Family medical leave is a federal law, and you can qualify for family medical leave even if you're on leave without pay from CU. So a lot of times individuals will not have the 12 weeks or 480 hours necessary to carry them through on a paid basis. But we all need to keep in mind that there's an obligation on the university's part to then provide that leave should the employee want it on an unpaid basis up to that maximum amount of time. We will need medical certification, and you know, although this is one of the more obvious medical conditions, we still need to understand you know, the employee's health status and have some documentation to support the awarding of family medical leave, and as well as the parental leave. So there's a, there's a form that needs to be given to the medical provider to fill out, and that should be returned to the individual department human resources liaison there. Okay, there may also be situations prepartum that involve need for medical care, need for bed rest. This would certainly all qualify under the family medical leave as issues needing to be addressed, and leave being allowed to be taken. So if there is a situation that arises during the pregnancy that would require some additional leave, we should be aware of that, and that should be documented. To utilize this, we need to notify the supervisor of the need for leave, and there are individuals in the department that get copied on this, most notably the human resources liaison in your department. There are individuals in my office that process this and designate leave as well. We need to be considerate of providing the same or equal job when an individual returns to a department. That can get pretty specific with regard to case law around that, but there, you know, it may be the same office, it may be, you know, I had a window before, so we really do try to go all out to provide a return to the same position when an individual returns from a family medical leave. I've kind of touched on this a little bit. It can be taken on an intermittent basis. It can be days or hours at a time, depending on the qualifying medical condition. And an individual has to perform the essential job functions when they return from family medical leave. These are typically not an issue postpartum. Individuals have, you know, rather a lengthy period of time to recover postpartum. And I have to say, I haven't seen any situations in my recollection where we've had to modify, although I'll get to, you know, ADA issues in a moment, because pregnancy is considered, you know, a temporary disability under the ADA. So forms and information found here on this particular link, which you will all have after Evelyn distributes it to you. Okay, I think I've covered that as well. I want to move on to the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, since we're talking about rights here. Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978 is an amendment to the Civil Rights Act, and prohibits discrimination on pregnancy, discrimination based on pregnancy, childbirth, medical conditions related to that. As you may know, we're not allowed to refuse to hire qualified candidates based on pregnancy status. Matter of fact, we hire a number of individuals understanding that they're pregnant, and while they may deliver during that initial 1-year period with us, we endeavor to make memorandums of understanding to provide periods of leave for people, even though they might not qualify technically for the parental leave or family medical leave. So we do make those kinds of agreements. As far as reasonable accommodation, while I do mention here it's a temporary disability in the eyes of the law, any discrimination is also a violation of the ADA. So as far as reasonable accommodation goes, there may be some things that an individual needs pre-delivery that we would try and accommodate in the workplace, and that could be, probably most notably desks and perhaps some break times. So it becomes physically, there are physical changes that might require us to accommodate an individual in the workplace, as well as some possible break times, as I mentioned. And we work to put those in place. I haven't really seen an issue related to pregnancy that would cause an undue hardship on the operation of our business at this point. I'm going to move on to if there is a need for an accommodation in the workplace, we've got an individual on my staff that handles those requests specifically. Our ADA coordinator, Melissa Flippen, and we just need to, rather than simply make the arrangement, we would like to have it all documented to be in accordance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now I'd like to move on to short-term disability. This is a benefit that individuals can purchase during benefits open enrollment. The period of qualification for as pregnancy is typically about 6 weeks for what you might term a normal pregnancy. So with a 30-day waiting period, what that means is there is compensation at 60% of one's salary for a 2-week period after that initial 30 days. So that's an additional source of income that can be realized to cover at least part of this period. I think you'll have to kind of determine whether purchasing short-term disability is the return, what's the return on the investment there? monthly cost versus what you might realize in that 2-week period. There are of course, other good reasons to purchase a short-term disability insurance policy during open enrollment. But it's very relevant to the topic here, and should be something that should be considered. So that's kind of briefly the end of what I prepared. What kind of questions might we have out there?
We have many questions, actually, Doug. No, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. It has really shown how the university is supporting ladies that go through pregnancy. So
there's a lot of different policies and procedures in place. So
yeah, that is very interesting. So just a couple of questions. Like the first one is related to, you mentioned that during pregnancy or after pregnancy, besides taking parental leave, which is 160 hours, women can also take sick leave. And you also spoke about 160 hours paid, which are like 4 weeks, and then 5 months, a total of 6. So the 5 months. Yeah,
so
it's kind of like
parental leave is as an entitlement a 6-month period of time.
I see.
The 160 hours of paid leave happens somewhere in there.
I see.
And that leaves 5 months of, and that's again taken on a block basis. That's an entitlement. If it's desired that it be taken intermittently, that's something that has to be negotiated with the unit and used within a year.
I see. And then when we talk about FMLA, so let's say I take some FMLA and then I just get pregnant again. So how time in between, or which one is supposed to be the time in between for a person like me to be taking again FMLA?
So you're saying, so one becomes pregnant and delivers like January 1. And then becomes pregnant shortly thereafter and delivers within that same 12-month period?
Yeah, well, pregnancy is like 9 months, like you breastfeed for like 1 year, but let's say if that happens.
Yeah.
Can a woman take FMLA after 9 months again, or there's no specific clause?
Yeah, what we do is look back, and we have to look back 365 days and say, of the 480 hours, how much was taken in the last 365 days? So in the example I gave, where somebody delivers January 1, gets pregnant in March and delivers like at the end of November, they wouldn't be eligible for family medical leave at that time. It wouldn't happen until January 1 that they would be eligible again.
Oh, I see.
But it's not a calendar, it's a rolling 365-day period of time.
Oh, I see. That's very interesting. And then you also spoke about pregnancy discrimination and the fact that pregnancy is considered a temporary disability.
Yeah.
And also that there are some accommodations that in the case of pregnant women need some accommodations, we need to go through certain process and record certain paperwork. I'm just like, I remember that when I was pregnant, I needed kind of like a chair because obviously you start like growing and like your belly starts getting like bigger, and I just didn't know about it. But like, I just like went and grabbed another chair. I didn't know that the university was truly supportive towards this. And that's really like great to know,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. There could be back issues, right? And so.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Is there any other questions that somebody might have? They can just post it on the group chat. So I'm going to give just a couple of seconds to see if somebody else has any other questions. And then we will see how it goes. Actually, no more questions. Oh, yeah, go for it. Sorry.
I have a question, Doug.
Yes.
Actually, I have 2 questions. So, okay, if I take my 1 month paid leave from CU, and then I take my sick leave, then I'm just a little bit confused still about the short-term disability. So let's say I have a month of sick leave, right? I have the month paid from CU. So then like I can start taking my short-term disability and I'll be paid, and the waiting period would have already passed, or like, I don't get that.
Well, like, I mean, in a typical sense, you might say the 160 days of paid leave would cover that first 30-day waiting period.
Okay.
So you would use your 160 days of university paid leave, then go on short-term disability, then
Wait, my 160 hours or 160?
160 hours, sorry, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
160 hours of
So
paid.
160 hours, then I would go on short-term disability,
Right.
and then I would use my sick days after that, or I would use my sick days first.
Well, you would use sick leave after that because because there's only that the insurance company only sees postpartum a 6-week period of disability.
Oh,
But once you get beyond that initial 6-week period, there's no coverage.
oh, so you're saying, but I thought that it said for the short-term disability on your slide that you had to use all your sick days before you could use that.
You know, there may be that caveat. Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so then so essentially then what you're saying is, assuming we have 2 weeks worth of sick time, we would not be able to use short.
You might not be. Yes, you're correct. You might not be eligible for that. So
Gotcha.
take a look at again the return on investment and something like that.
Okay, and then my second question is, so if I use my, like I use my 1 month paid from CU, then I use my sick days, then I can just take unpaid up to 4 months. I don't.
Well, you would have to
vacation
use
days.
your vacation leave as well before being put on unpaid leave.
Oh, okay, okay,
There's a Regent policy about that.
gotcha. So you do have to exhaust all your sick leave and all your vacation days. So can you like, okay, I think that's all my questions. Okay, thank you.
There's a question in the group chat about, is there a limit to how much sick vacation time can be taken in addition to the leave? If we're talking about during that period of FML or parental leave that you're entitled to, you can take paid leave up to the limits of those policies and laws. Anything beyond that would be kind of again a discussion with your unit as far as taking, and just like any vacation leave, right? But if it's within the period of FML or that initial 6-month period of parental leave, you've got a right to take that sick or vacation leave. I hope that helps.
Oh yeah, so there's another question from Allison.
Yep.
If these policies are the same for different classes of employees, like staff versus postdocs versus students, or if what you are talking about, it just belongs to employees, what is considered staff?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's 12-month faculty, it's staff. Students are not included in this policy.
How about
These
postdocs?
policies.
Are
Postdocs receive FML, they get leave off the books. I'd have to specifically look at the policy on the parental leave policy to see if it applies to postdocs. Bit of a gray area.
Sure. Well, thank you, Doc, so much for your time and for elucidating all these questions for us.
And if there's more questions, I've got to leave to get to another meeting, but collect those, send them to me. I'd be glad to answer them. And like I said, I'll send you the PowerPoint.
Sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, and now we're gonna move to the next presentation that we have. Shana cannot be here with us today, but she sent us a video, and she's going to be talking about rights and responsibilities of a student during pregnancy. So I'm going to start sharing that video with all of you.
Hi there, my name is Shanna Peterson and I work for CU Denver and Anschutz Medical Campus's Office of Equity. Excited to talk to you today a little bit about some pregnancy rights, responsibilities that are particular to CU. So to begin, I just want to give an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So the first is just an Office of Equity introduction so that you can be familiar with my office and what we do. The second is to talk about the non-discrimination policy, specifically as it relates to pregnancy. Then we'll move to talk about staff and faculty pregnancy accommodations as well as student accommodations. And then lastly, we'll talk about the lactation support here on campus. So the Office of Equity is pretty unique in that it serves both the CU Denver campus as well as the Anschutz Medical Campus. We oversee a few different policies, which is really kind of what flagship in our office. And so that's what we're best known for, but we oversee the sexual misconduct, intimate partner violence, and stalking policy, most often referred to as the sexual misconduct policy. We also oversee the non-discrimination policy as well as the amorous relationship and conflict of interest policy. We assist with a few different things that are outside of that policy and compliance work. We're really proud to assist with the affirmative action plan on both campuses. We offer prevention training and outreach on information that's related to these policies and relevant topics. Our office oversees pregnancy accommodations because that falls within Title IX. Our office was originally the Title IX office. And so that's why we oversee those. And then we also offer administrative support for the lactation rooms. In jumping into the non-discrimination policy, the easiest place to start is in regards to the protected characteristics. So the university or our policy has 15 protected characteristics. Some are from federal law, some are from state, and then some are particular to our regents. So political affiliation and political philosophy are two that came down from the regents that are particular only to CU as a system. When we think of discrimination, there are a couple different types of prohibited conduct. Within discrimination, I think differential treatment is a pretty anticipated experience of discrimination, but there are also other forms of discrimination. So one is disparate impact, another is a failure to accommodate. And so there are three unique protected characteristics that require that accommodation. Those are religion, disability, and pregnancy. So very interesting and unique just to those protected identities. There are also other forms of prohibited conduct within the non-discrimination policy. One is harassment, hostile environment, and then retaliation. And just to clarify, an experience of retaliation has to be based on engagement with our office in order for it to fall under the policy. So just something to be aware of, but something interesting. So I had mentioned before the 15 protected characteristics that we have outlined in our policy and some of the prohibited conduct, but it is interesting because even with a complaint of discrimination, if it's pregnancy related, there also might be underlying protected characteristics that also might be a part of the complaint. So I have here age, sex, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. These can overlap with pregnancy in a complaint, and so it's just something to be aware of. There could be other elements that are occurring that we should be aware of. So I also wanted to talk about elements of pregnancy because I think we can all understand pregnancy in and of itself is protected, but there's also components of pregnancy that are protected. I divided this into employment and education, and you'll see that being a reoccurring theme throughout the slideshow, is just this difference between employment and education protections. There will also be parts that are similar, but for employment, the EEOC, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has a Pregnancy Discrimination Act, and it protects pregnancy, so that includes current, past, potential, and intended pregnancies. It also protects childbirth, medical conditions related to pregnancy or childbirth. So you'll see right below that the ADA protects temporary disabilities due to pregnancy. Most often, a condition related to pregnancy might include something like gestational diabetes. So that's one that you'll see often provided as an example. And then also, abortion or termination of a pregnancy is included as another, I don't know what other word to use, but element of pregnancy that is protected. For education, pregnancy from the Title IX, from the Educational Amendment Act, Title IX is protected, but they also include marital and parental status, and these aren't protected characteristics in and of themselves. These are protected within pregnancy, meaning an unmarried pregnant student should not be treated differently than a married pregnant student. So not using that marital status as a qualifier in the pregnancy treatment or accommodations. Similarly with parental status, our parental students or our parenting students should not be treated differently than our non-parenting students. So that's what that parental status means, but it's an interesting protection that students have. So I wanted to create a slide that talks specifically about staff and faculty and their accommodations separate from students. So even though we're all working for this one big CU community, because we're serving different roles, what policies, guidelines, laws kind of inform our pregnancy accommodations is a little bit different. So I do want to show that. On the left, you'll see accommodations that are specific to CU. So these are things that are very like company specific or institutionally specific. And then on the right are components that are specific to federal government and state law, and particularly Colorado. So CU specific, and I put accommodations, but they're not accommodations necessarily. Policies, guidelines, etc. So CU has a paid parental leave policy, which was new maybe when I started, but it still feels new. It was really an exciting decision to implement that. But even newer to our campus is the guidelines for children in the workplace and classroom. So this is one of the few policies that overlaps staff and faculty pregnancy accommodations as well as students. And then you'll be hearing from Doug about more of HR's role, but just wanted to make the clarification that staff and faculty will receive pregnancy accommodations or workplace accommodations through human resources, which is different than how students would receive their accommodations. What I will say is a failure to accommodate would be overseen by the Office of Equity, no matter what, whether it was a student or a staff and faculty pregnancy accommodation. Specific to federal and Colorado state laws, so some of the things that inform pregnancy and employment are Colorado labor laws. The EEOC, as I mentioned before, that Equal Employment Opportunity Commission gives guidance about pregnancy as a protected characteristic, and then also the Family Medical Leave Act through the U.S. Department of Labor provides guidelines specific to pregnant employees. And the reason I have this example at the bottom is there are other protections for pregnant people outside of their employment. So specifically, this example is the Fair Housing Act, and HUD protects pregnant people from being discriminated against when being considered for a mortgage loan. But because that's outside of this employment context, it's not something that the Office of Equity or the university could assist with. So something to be aware of. There are other pregnancy protections out there. So to shift gears a little bit to students, so the Office of Equity actually oversees the accommodations for students. That's something that was set forth within Title IX. But interestingly, the Disability Resource and Services Office would oversee accommodations for students that had temporary disabilities due to their pregnancy. So it is something that students have that staff and faculty don't have in this way. Once again, we have the guidelines for children in the workplace and classroom at the very end, but right above that is this guideline for assisting students with pregnancy and parenting. And it's something that I like to share with faculty just so that they're aware. The guidelines offer some examples of things that pregnant students might need. So whether it's flexibility, if it's, planning their curriculum a little bit differently, also includes things like bathroom breaks and bigger desks if they need it. So it's an interesting document. It can be found on our website. Definitely encourage folks to give it a look. And then on the right, similarly, we have federal and Colorado state law information. For students in pregnancy, it really is all coming from Title IX of the Education Amendments Act. And so just something to be aware of, that's really where all of the information is coming from. Similarly, Colorado Department of Education doesn't offer their own guidelines. They really just reiterate Title IX. So there aren't any Colorado specific laws for supporting pregnant students. So just something interesting. Okay, now we're really going to switch gears and talk a little bit about lactation support. And this is specifically on the Anschutz Medical Campus. Our office does assist with sharing information related to the CU Denver campus, the Auraria campus, so that includes spaces outside of CU buildings. We also assist with CU system lactation spaces, as well as things like at UC Health and the Children's Hospital. So we have all kinds of information, but ultimately this next portion is just about the Anschutz Medical Campus and the lactation support there. Okay, so we talked a lot about the different policies, laws, guidelines regarding pregnancy and education, pregnancy employment, pregnancy on our campus. With lactation laws, those same overlaps aren't as evident. So there's the U.S. Department of Labor gives some very, I guess, clear protections regarding lactation and requiring a company or a business provide time for someone to pump, and as well as a private space. So that's really what the U.S. Department of Labor says. That comes from the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which was amended since then. But yeah, so that's the U.S. Department of Labor federal level of protection for lactation. And then a step down from that would be the different Colorado breastfeeding laws. So there are a couple that are very specific to employment. That's the Workplace Accommodations for Nursing Mothers Act, as well as the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act. So those two things speak specifically and similarly to requiring businesses to provide time and space for people that need to pump. The Colorado breastfeeding laws also includes a law about breastfeeding in public places. Without knowing the quote specifically or the law specifically, it says that anyone that is breastfeeding has a right to breastfeed wherever they have the right to be. So definitely a very progressive law for Colorado and breastfeeding folks. The next one that I just think is interesting is a postponement of jury service for a person who's breastfeeding. I think it is interesting that that was taken into account because of the requirement that people be there. So it's a cool acknowledgement to the experience of breastfeeding for sure. So as far as some lactation room stats, the Anschutz Medical Campus has 20 lactation rooms. It hasn't always had 20 lactation rooms. My predecessor really showed a lot of initiative with creating and cultivating the rooms on campus. 20 lactation rooms also is specific to rooms, not necessarily spaces. So I have that for multi-user spaces. Assuming that those spaces have more than one person, hopefully less than 100, using them at a time. And then we also have 2 Mama pods on campus, which is pretty unique. We have one in RC1 North and also one in Ed1. As our office kind of assisted with centralizing some of the lactation support on campus, we started documenting people that were requesting access. And so since July of 2018, our office has assisted or facilitated lactation access for 411 individuals on campus. I think that's major. It's very cool, and we're really proud to have done that. But we obviously know that that number is somewhat shy of how many people on campus actually were lactating at any time. So we acknowledge, some people choose not to pump or breastfeed. We also acknowledge that maybe people have stopped pumping or breastfeeding by the time they return to work. There are also individuals on campus that don't need a space to pump. And so they might not have ever needed to come in contact with our office, and their needs were just being met either departmentally or in their private office. So I'm sure there are more people on campus that were lactating, but still very cool to have been able to facilitate that access. Also, similarly cool, in 2019, we assisted 49 visitors with lactation support on campus. So those 49 visitors included people that were attending either new employee orientation or new student orientation, where, by the time they're on campus, they might not have a badge, but they still need a place to pump. So we were really excited to help with that. There was also people that were coming here for events that we were able to assist. And also the one that I'm most proud of is being able to provide support for people that were here to interview. So what a great impression we made on them that we were able to take care of their needs. And so definitely really proud to have been able to help folks that were interviewing with us. Feel welcome. Okay, the last part of this lactation section that I wanted to talk about was really just the process, because when someone requests lactation access, there's a couple of different steps that they might think there is, or they might not understand what's happening on our end. And so really what I wanted to show was how simple this is for the requester. So there's 5 different columns. So there's the steps on the far left, there's the requester. So those are steps that the requester might take. There's the Office of Equity, then there's badging, and then to the right underneath my head is EMS. So step 1 is going to be for the requester to submit a pregnancy and parenting form. That might be the only step that requester has to make. Everything else is handled between the Office of Equity, badging, and EMS. So you'll see there is that step 4 for a requester. If they don't have an EMS account, they might have to request an EMS account just for the use of the reservation system. But if they already have it, they really just need to have that one step. So there's the first step of submitting the form. The Office of Equity, or Shannon May Peterson, receives that form. When I receive that form, I respond to the requester. I give them information about the most up-to-date rooms, information about EMS and badging, additional resources. I'll attach the EMS how-to manual. So it teaches you how to actually use the reservation system. And so I send that email. At that point, that's where there's the possibility that the requester might have to request that EMS account if they don't already have it. If they do, forget step 4, we're moving on. So I send that email and then I forward that form to badging, so security and badging office, and EMS. We have 2 great EMS coordinators that have been so helpful with making EMS way easier to use for our users than just normal. So then I forward that to them, and you'll see at the bottom there, badging and EMS's columns are merged because they're doing the same action simultaneously, but in their own offices. So they both will receive the form. They both will give their appropriate access. So badging will give badge access, EMS will give EMS access, and then they're both sending a confirmation email. Then the last step is the EMS coordinators will add the requester to our listserv. And the listserv is where we're able to grab all these great numbers about how many lactation space users we have. It also has what buildings people are in, so we can see if there's high need areas. It has the duration, so when someone's requested it, when it's expired, so lactation should last a full year. It also might have information about, maybe someone emailed and said, I don't need access anymore, but I want to be up to date with any new events or policies that are coming out. So can you keep me on your email list? And so we'll have notes about that. So it's a pretty cool database to have just so that we can better support folks and show a greater need or that we're fulfilling a need on campus. So we're really proud of that. But yeah, ultimately lactation access should be simple. Submit the form and we'll do the rest. Well, that's all for me. I wanted to make sure that you had my supervisor's information, Will DeWeese. We're not always at our phones, but feel free to leave us a message. There's my contact information. I will point out it's SHANNA.Petersen, and Petersen is PETERSEN. A little tricky. And then similarly, I want to make sure that you have our Office of Equity's general information. So there's our phone number. Like I said, we might not be at the phones. Feel free to leave a message or send us an email at equity@ucdenver.edu. Scroll around on our website. We have a bunch of information about pregnancy and lactation, and that's where you can find that lactation form. Definitely don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions for anyone in my office about any of this. We're happy to help. And thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, that was a presentation from Chana. And please do not forget to reach out to her, as Amber mentioned on the group chat. And also I want to appreciate Amber. She's our Winston president who is working on the background, and she's amazing. And also Alison Sony's present. So thank you both for being here. And now we have another of our fabulous speakers, Alison Mangrant. She's the manager, research, safety, and industrial hygiene in the Department of Environmental Health and Safety. And she'll be talking about occupational health and chemical safety and reproductive health hazards. Thank you, Alison, for being here.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, cool. I have slides as well. I'll try to go through them quickly because I know we're kind of running behind, but I think that's great because there's been a lot of really good information. So I will fly through these, and if you guys have questions, I want to make sure that Greg has enough time too. So if you have questions that aren't answered, like the other speaker said, please feel free to contact me with any questions or follow-up that you have. I will attempt to share these slides. Looks like that's working, so that's great. So I'll get started. So for those of you, particularly that work in a lab with either chemicals or biological materials, a lot of this information is going to be relevant to you. For those of you that maybe are more like in an office setting, some of this is perhaps less relevant, but hopefully useful information for everybody. So full disclosure, I'm a mom. This is my 3-year-old son, Michael, and my 1-year-old daughter, Anne-Marie. I will note that I breastfed both kids. So if you have questions or struggles, I am happy to relate and cheer on other moms. I pumped in more weird places, and I'm sure many of you can relate to that as well. So happy to help answer any questions that you guys have. So just a little bit about what kind of role EHS has in the process if you're pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant. Obviously, others have talked about kind of the HR process. If you are working in a lab though, and if you have questions, you should contact EHS. And the first point of contact is really our occupational health clinic. The phone number is here. Reporting that you're pregnant is obviously voluntary, but obviously if you report to us, we're able to help you answer questions that you might have. And the little asterisk there is just noting that for people that are working with radioactive isotopes or ionizing radiation machines, it is really important that you do report, just because there are some controls and reporting mechanisms they have in place for you. And if you don't report, they can't do that. So once you contact occupational health, they'll kind of talk with you about the nature of your work, what you do, any concerns that you have. And then if you do have questions about specific chemicals or things like that, they'll put you in contact with the group that I manage, which is Research Safety and Industrial Hygiene. And then we'll follow up with you and kind of walk through the process of how we can make sure that you're safe and that your baby's safe. So a lot of what I'm talking about here today is from this document, the Reproductive Health Hazards Guidance document. It's posted on our website. And I did put the link to this at the bottom, or the last slide, sorry. And I'm happy to share these slides with you guys so you have them and can check out some of the different resources here later. So as I mentioned, once occupational health reaches out to the research safety group, one of our EHS industrial hygienists will conduct a workplace hazard assessment. We have 2 industrial hygienists, myself, and then my colleague Brianne Beck, who is also a mom. She has a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So we are with you and we understand your concerns and can definitely relate to a lot of the questions that people have, moms and dads, I should say, expectant moms, expectant dads. So just of note, hazardous materials in the lab can have different health effects. Reproductive toxins are different than mutagens, are different than teratogens, and different than embryotoxins, and impact men, women, and embryos differently. And there are several controls that we could suggest based on what you're doing. There are administrative controls such as altering your work practices, or engineering controls like biosafety cabinets or fume hoods. And I'll talk about those a little bit more here later. And then finally, using personal protective equipment. This is like my favorite slide of all time. I include it in all the talks I do. But when we think about trying to control or minimize hazards, this is really the framework that we work in the field of industrial hygiene, which is trying to eliminate the hazard if possible first, and then really kind of working our way down this hierarchy and using PPE as the last resort. I know people's instinct, especially with COVID going on, is like, let's put on a respirator, or let's put on gloves, or let's do this, put on this PPE. But we really want to think about how to minimize exposure from the top down before we get to PPE. When we do work with someone who has questions, maybe they're thinking about getting pregnant or are pregnant, we of course recognize, as others have talked about here, that pregnancy is a protected condition, and we will certainly work kind of with you and keep things confidential, particularly if you haven't talked with your supervisor or the PI. And if you have questions about hazards, we can definitely do that without needing to identify you or disclose that to your lab. So kind of keeping that in mind, I was just going to walk through a couple of the specific hazards that we deal with most commonly here on campus. And again, if you guys have any questions as we go, please let me know. So I mentioned this earlier, and I'm not going to read all of these definitions, but I think one thing to keep in mind for folks that are working in the labs and maybe have questions about chemicals, maybe you're looking at a safety data sheet, really important to kind of keep these definitions in mind in terms of how different hazards can impact the pregnant mother, impact the fetus, or impact even dads or expectant fathers. So again, I'm not going to read through these just in the interest of time, but just kind of important to keep that framework in mind. So the first specific hazard, and I alluded to this earlier, that I'll mention here, is just radiation. Ionizing radiation is a known reproductive hazard. It's been linked to birth defects and other reproductive problems. Radioactive materials are one of the most highly regulated hazards that we have here on campus. And so, for that reason, there are definitely specific federal and state regulations aimed at protecting pregnant workers. Specifically, once you would report that you're pregnant if you're working with radioactive materials to our radiation safety group. They're able to get you a special dosimeter for the fetus, so a fetal monitor, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, it is important that if you're working with these materials that you do report, just so that they can do that monitoring for you and make sure that your baby is safe. This is what that form looks like. It's available on our website, and again, I have the link at the end. It's pretty straightforward. As you can see, it's just date of conception and then your name and ID number. So that is radiation. Chemical hazards, kind of the next group that I'll talk about here. As I mentioned earlier, various hazards can have different impacts. So chemicals can be harmful to pregnant or breastfeeding women, or for members of the employee's family, if they're bringing contaminants home on their skin or clothes or things like that. So just, really important that, you're always following safety protocols and using appropriate PPE, but especially when you're pregnant. And some of the more common chemicals that we get questions about that are pretty prevalent here on campus are anesthetic gases, chemotherapy drugs, disinfectants or sterilants like glutaraldehyde or ethylene oxide, formaldehyde, and then various solvents. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those. And again, just in the interest of time, if you all have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me separately here. Before I go into those specific hazards, I just thought it'd be useful to talk about kind of a general framework for you to keep in mind. Like if you are working with a new chemical and you have that safety data sheet in hand, just some things that you can look for to kind of cue you in on what might be potentially hazardous about this material. So safety data sheets are all standardized. That's a result of basically OSHA and other international agencies agreeing upon this standard format that all safety data sheets would be produced in, and that's called the globally harmonized system. And under the globally harmonized system, there are a couple of elements that are must be present on all safety data sheets. The first one is a pictogram. And so there are various pictograms for different types of hazards. The ones that you would look for, the one that you would look for on either a safety data sheet or the chemical container itself would be this one over here on the right. This pictogram denotes that there's a health hazard. Unfortunately, as you can see down here, health hazard indicates any number of things. It could mean that the chemical is a carcinogen, a mutagen, could have reproductive toxicity, could be a sensitizer, have a specific organ toxicity or aspiration toxicity. So just seeing this alone doesn't mean that it's, potentially a reproductive toxin, but it should kind of, cue your brain into thinking like, I should maybe take a closer look at this. And then if you were looking at the actual safety data sheet, what you would look for are what's called hazard statements. And there are hundreds of hazard statements that have been standardized as part of this process. And the ones that really stick out as being of interest for folks that are pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant would be these ones here. And you can see they say, may cause genetic defects, may cause cancer, may damage fertility or the unborn child, or may cause harm to breastfed children. I just wanted to note that you might see variations of this, which say like suspected of causing cancer or suspected of causing damage to fertility or the unborn child. The difference there between may and suspected is how the hazard is defined basically by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. So the ones that say may, as you can see here, are for known hazards. So like there's, human and animal data on those hazards. For those that are suspected, there's maybe some animal data, but not human data, or there's not even animal data, but the chemical is suspected to be hazardous based on its known, chemical properties or structures or things like that. So those are kind of the things you'll want to look for. But like I said, I'm going to talk about some of the specific kind of more common chemicals that we see here, but just wanted to give you a framework of, here are some things that you could look for on different chemicals that you might see. So the first group of chemical hazards that I'll talk about are anesthetic gases, and really, mainly I'm talking about isoflurane. We have so many folks here on campus that are doing animal research and use isoflurane as an anesthetic. There have been several studies and have found associations between exposure to anesthetic gases and reproductive problems, including miscarriage. While there is no occupational exposure limit for isoflurane, there is a recommended exposure limit, and that's 2 parts per million with a 60-minute period over a 60-minute period of time. And we can do sampling for isoflurane. So if you're working with it and have questions, let me know. We've done this for several different scenarios here on campus. Obviously, there are different levels of work, some folks that are working permanently in the animal facilities and working with isoflurane all the time. Others using specialized equipment or various kind of configurations of their experiment. So with all of the sampling that we've done, in some instances, the exposure's been non-detect. For example, if you're working in a fume hood or a biosafety cabinet, generally we will not detect isoflurane outside of those hoods. Contrarily, if you're working on the bench top and not in a hood, we have detected isoflurane in some of those situations, and we've been able to work with groups about some controls that might help, including working with OLAR to make recommendations kind of on your animal procedure itself to see if there's room for improvement and kind of minimizing the anesthetic used. Next chemical I wanted to talk about was formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a known human carcinogen, and this is where those definitions that I mentioned earlier are really important. It's not a known embryotoxin, for example, or reproductive hazard, but because it is a carcinogen, we are careful, especially when pregnant women mention that they are working with formaldehyde, just because we know, the chemical itself has the ability to change DNA. There's some data, some studies that have looked at fertility problems, but like I said, it's not conclusive. And it's not very likely that formaldehyde enters breast milk, just with most exposures being relatively low. And I will note, while formaldehyde and formalin are really common here on campus, there's hundreds of groups that have it in their inventory. There's only one regulated formaldehyde work area on the entire campus, and that's over in the Anschutz inpatient pavilion in the pathology area. So for the most part, while it is very common, the levels that we see here on campus are very low. And similar to isoflurane, when we've done sampling for formaldehyde, if folks are using it in the fume hood, it's non-detect outside of the fume hood. So those engineering controls are really effective for protecting people from that exposure. Next, solvents, just generally speaking, of course, solvents means, a lot of different chemicals fall into the category of solvents. Some solvents have been shown to increase chances of having miscarriage, other effects as well, stillbirth, preterm birth, low birth weight, etc. Some of the more common solvents that have been examined with respect to pregnancy are listed here. Some of those aren't really used very commonly on campus, but others are. Toluene, hexane, and chloroform are pretty prevalent here. And so I will say, it's important when kind of thinking about these is to go back and look at the safety data sheet, or just contact EHS and we'll help you walk through it. But I pulled them up for those chemicals that are kind of common here, just to show you what it might look like. So you can see for benzene there on the top left, looking at those hazard statements, it says may cause genetic defects, which, as I mentioned earlier, means that there are published human and animal studies showing that it has those impacts. For toluene, chloroform, and hexane, the box didn't pop up here for chloroform, sorry. It's way down here at the bottom. You can see it's suspected for chloroform, suspected toluene, suspected hexane. So, the evidence isn't super strong, or there's not human evidence, but there's enough out there that, we want to be careful and make sure that anyone working on campus here that's working with these and is thinking about becoming pregnant or is pregnant is safe. So that's just kind of to give you an idea of what you might see or what you might look for. Just a quick note about breastfeeding, not all chemicals can get into the breast milk, and not all chemicals will necessarily harm your baby. The most common groups that do tend to, they're able to cross and enter the milk would be heavy metals such as lead, mercury, trying to think of any others, but those are the main two. And then radioactive chemicals like iodine-131. Again, those aren't all that common here on campus, but especially for women that are working with radioactive materials, just important to keep that in mind. And as I mentioned before, just using engineering and administrative controls as much as possible, and wearing PPE, especially your lab coats, so that you're not bringing chemicals home on your clothing or skin or something like that. A quick note about biological hazards. Some bacteria, viruses, or other infectious agents have been shown to increase chances of having a miscarriage. or infections pass through to the baby, to the fetus during pregnancy, and can cause damage. If you're working with unique or unusual pathogens, contact our biosafety group, and they can definitely answer some of those questions for you. Just to kind of give you an idea, here are some of the biological hazards that have been shown to some extent to cross that barrier and impact the fetus. I will note probably the most important one to keep in mind is Coxiella brunetti, which is causes Q fever and is naturally occurring in sheep. And so we deal with this over at the perinatal research facility for the folks that are doing sheep research. Most of the other ones, tend to be less commonly worked with. But again, if you work with any of these, contact us and we can kind of walk through the process and make sure that you're using best practice when it comes to biological safety to keep you and the baby safe. The last, just kind of summarizing controls and things that we would walk through when we're doing a risk assessment. General reminders, of course, make sure your vaccines are up to date, get a flu shot, wash your hands, especially during a pandemic, and just practice good, general lab safety and hygiene, keeping things clean, and those best sterile practice, best biological practice, that type of thing. So then, yeah, summarizing, kind of as I mentioned earlier, really thinking about, substitution and elimination. Is there someone else in your lab that can do this task while you're pregnant? Or can you remove that particular chemical from the process and it doesn't impact the science? If those options aren't available, administrative changes such as, again, having someone else perform the work, maybe doing it less often or something like that. And then finally, engineering controls, which, as I mentioned, have really been shown to be effective here on campus, using chemical fume hoods and using biological safety cabinets to protect you. And then last resort, of course, is PPE. Generally, the PPE that you wear should be the same as it is or was prior to pregnancy. But I think just reminding people to be really careful, about protecting your skin. And then, if respiratory protection is warranted on the risk assessment, then we would kind of pursue that option. So that is all I had. I know I kind of whipped through that quick. If there are specific questions, I'm happy to answer them, or if it's easier for you guys to contact me directly, I'm happy to talk with you one-on-one.
Thank you, Allison, for that wonderful presentation. So far, I don't see any questions on the group chat, but that's a lot of great information because, well, I didn't disclose the fact that I'm also a mother, and yeah, you don't know what can affect your baby until you go through the process. So definitely planning and knowing this information ahead really will help future mothers. So thank you so much for this.
Yeah, I remember we were in touch, same types of questions when you were pregnant. So yeah, definitely reach out, guys, if you have any questions.
No, sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for this. And well, now we have Greg, and he's going to be talking about ergonomics. He's, I'm very sorry for the delay, Greg McGrew. He's a research instructor from bioengineering, and he will be talking about ergonomics. So thank you for being part of this. So please take it away from me.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for inviting me. Just give you a little bit of background on me. I'm a mechanical engineer, biomedical engineer, with a focus on rehabilitation engineering. And as was mentioned earlier, pregnancy, according to ADA, can be referred to as a temporary disability. In my capacity over the years as a rehab engineer, I've worked with people with all kinds of disabilities with regard to job accommodation, human factors issues, ergonomics. And I felt the need to say that because it's quite clear that I have never been through pregnancy. So I don't bring that level of credibility to what I'm about to say. But hopefully you'll find this helpful. Let me share my screen here. Okay, does everybody see that? Great. Okay, so I'm going to breeze through these slides. Some are a bit more critical than others, but essentially, whoops, let's see. There we go. So ergonomics is kind of a subset of human factors, and human factors, just to give you some context, is all about the study of the human-machine interface. And it deals with a whole variety of factors, which are listed below there. But our main focus here, once again, is ergonomics. And ergonomics deals primarily with people's posture, their movements, and the force that's exerted on their body in various joints and muscles and bones. And good ergonomics involves minimizing and eliminating postures that increase the strain on the body, and the same with forces and movements that can be injurious to people if they're not appropriate. So how does pregnancy impact ergonomics of your work and your daily activities? Well, in general, ergonomics is important within the context of pregnancy, and in some cases even more so, primarily because there's a lot at stake with regard to preventing injury. And the chances of injury are greater if you ignore ergonomic principles when you're pregnant than when you're not. So let's talk about the body changes that impact the ergonomics of posture and movement and force. As you get pregnant, as your time moves forward in pregnancy, you get heavier, obviously. Not only do you get heavier, but you get heavier out in front of your spine, which is critical, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Hormones create a situation where you retain fluid, which adds to your mass, and your soft tissues start to swell. And that has some specific impacts on the ergonomics of office work, typing that you might do, and I'll mention that. And finally, those same hormonal changes will cause joint instability. Your ligaments will loosen, and your joints will loosen, and that sets up a situation where you're more prone to injury. So I mentioned as you all know, your body weight increases. Anywhere from 15 to 40 pounds. The average is about 25 pounds, and you can think of 25 pounds as about 3 full gallons of water, which is quite a bit when you put it in that context. What are the effects of that weight increase? Well, it will decrease your standing tolerance. It will reduce the amount of stamina that you have. And another thing that people often don't think about is because of this weight increase, it increases your momentum. And how that translates into something to be concerned about is that it's harder for you to stop when you're moving. If you're walking down a flight of stairs, or if you're walking down a ramp, you may find that it's more onerous and more difficult for you to stop your progress simply because you have more momentum, because you have more weight. Okay. The shape change involved in this increase in mass that you have is also something that can contribute to injury. Most of that weight gain, of course, is out in front of your spine. One of the things that it does is tends to make it more difficult for you to reach items. It's harder for you to hold on to things, or can be, because of some of these changes, but it's also harder for you to reach. Things are farther away. You're farther away from things that are in front of you because of this mass that's in front of you. The biggest thing that happens that affects overall ergonomics is the shift that your body goes through in terms of its center of gravity or its center of mass. One of the big things that happens there is that increases stress on your lower back. And of course, that often translates into back pain, among some other things. So let's step back a minute and talk about kind of a fundamental ergonomic principle of maintaining neutral posture. Okay, the picture here shows an example of, we'll call him Frank, Frank on the left, under neutral posture, is standing straight. His body mass is directly over his feet, which is important in keeping him standing in a stable position, not tipping over. You see a frontal view of him standing up straight. He's not leaning to one side or the other. That's an ideal neutral posture for your body to be in terms of stability. And you can think of stability as less potential for injury or falling, okay, as opposed to the awkward postures that are shown on the right. Okay. Well, so that's a neutral posture example for Frank. What does it look like for a woman who is in her third trimester? Neutral posture is very different. So if we look at the image on the right, we can see that a woman who is not pregnant, neutral posture is pretty much like Frank's. Okay, the center of mass goes right down through the middle of the body and is supported in a stable manner by that person's feet. If that person tries to assume the same posture and they're far into pregnancy, what happens? Well, they're going to have a tendency to tip forward because that center of mass is moved forward out in front of their feet or their base of support. So that's something that has to be compensated for. We mentioned fluid retention as a body change, swelling of soft tissues. And aside from the weight gain associated with that, if you're in a work situation where you do a fair amount of computer work, typing on a computer keyboard, it can increase the potential for carpal tunnel syndrome, because as those tissues swell, you start to get nerve impingement in your wrists that crops up and turns into carpal tunnel syndrome as you continue to do repetitive motion with your fingers when you type. Loose ligaments is also a manifestation of body changes during pregnancy. Looser ligaments means looser joints, including spinal ligaments. And the bottom line effect of that is that it reduces the stability of those joints. So how do these changes affect the ergonomics of your daily activities? So one fairly obvious manifestation is that you fatigue more readily. Certainly as a woman is pregnant and growing this human being in their body, there are a lot of body resources that are in demand to handle that process. And so those physical resources are not available for at a level they were before for daily activities. So the baby is sapping, if you will, some of the energy that you would normally have. Not to mention fatigue associated with the fact that you now have more weight that you have to deal with and carry around. So you fatigue more readily. Maintaining balance can be more taxing for reasons we talked about in terms of the shift of your body mass forward. Fortunately, these changes happen relatively slowly over time, and people adjust to that. But oftentimes they find, because of a combination of looseness of their joints, excuse me, and the greater mass that they have in front of them, their balance is not what it used to be, and they're more prone to falls, more prone to carpal tunnel. I mentioned that, typically associated with the retention of fluid in your wrists. It's something to consider if you're doing a fair amount of typing during your pregnancy, and I'll talk a little bit about some ergonomic changes or things that you can do to help mitigate potential for injury there. We referred to this before, more prone to injury in general for falls, joint injuries, dislocation, higher incidence of joint dislocation for women who are pregnant. Excuse me. Loss of grip because of the looseness of your joints, fatigue, maybe carpal tunnel as well. It tends to be more difficult for you to hold on to things, grasp things, and of course, back injury. All of this weight that you have out in front of your body tends to significantly increase the stress on the muscles in your lower back. Well, so we've got all these issues. That's just dandy. How do we deal with them? Okay. So as your pregnancy advances, things you would carry with two hands will need to be carried farther away from your spine. If you're carrying them out in front of you, excuse me, there's a potential for the same amount of weight that you would carry prior to pregnancy to cause greater injury to your back because you're carrying it farther away from your spine. And that creates what we call in biomechanics a greater moment arm and puts more stress on those muscles. So it's something to keep in mind. If you can avoid carrying things out in front of you, try to carry them close to your side. That's closer to your spine. As I said, this puts increased stress on your back. Avoid that posture. So in general, you need to consider about dialing back your expectations about what you can lift, what you can't, shouldn't lift or carry, all the same things that you did before. Dial that back a little bit. Don't bend forward any more than you need to. My wife tells me about a situation she had when she was pregnant. I believe she was at a mall. She was shopping somewhere and there was a coin that was on the floor, a quarter or something, and she just inadvertently, as she normally would reach down to pick it up. And she ended up falling down because she wasn't used to not being able to do that and have that additional mass in front of her that pulled her over. She was fine, baby's fine, but that sort of situation can happen without you realizing. Be careful when walking up and down stairs. Use the handrail. I mentioned the problem with increased momentum because of added weight. Be careful, go slowly, and be conscious of each step you take. Don't be reluctant to use your hands to help steady yourself when you stand or walk. As you get into your third trimester and you have a lot of mass in front of your spine, walk slowly, look at your path of travel, say when you get out of bed to go to the bathroom, see that there are handholds that you can grab onto along the way. When working at a desk or a table, and this is standard good ergonomic principles, whether you're pregnant or not, use a chair with a good adjustable back support, a lumbar support, use a footrest to help reduce swelling in your feet, and put things that you use regularly close to you to limit reach, like your telephone, pens and pencils that you may grab, other items that you use on your desk. Keep them close so you don't have to reach out so far. When you're not working at a desk or table, do exactly the same thing. Use a chair with a good lumbar support, use a footrest to help reduce swelling, and put those things that you use regularly close to you to limit the amount of reach. I show this slide because some people find these belts quite helpful in helping to reduce not only low back pain, but abdominal pain. This doesn't necessarily remove that big mass in front of you that you have to deal with, but it does keep it a little closer to your spine. It keeps that mass from shifting weight, which allows you to be a little more stable on your feet. The message on these is that they should not be worn all day, every day, but they're available and some people find them helpful. We talked about typing, practice good ergonomics to be safe. So once again, swelling, particularly in your wrists, retaining fluid can increase the likelihood of impingement of nerves that go through your wrists, and that can lead to carpal tunnel syndrome. One way to minimize the potential for that is to make sure that you type with your wrists in a very neutral position, like the picture with the green check mark on the left. Not only do you want to try to keep that wrist straight vertically, you want to try to keep it straight with your arm laterally, as opposed to ulnar deviation or deviating your hand midline, and that shows up on this image on the right. These are just some helpful links that I saw last time I did this presentation. People were interested in pregnancy pillows, and there's a number of them out there. They're simply large pillows that are shaped to provide support for your belly when you're laying on the side. And some people find those helpful during pregnancy. Once again, I have no personal experience with those, but I've heard good things about them. I have blasted through this, but I would be more than interested in any comments anyone might have with regard to possible experiences that they've had that relate to ergonomics or problems with ergonomics or work activities that they've been involved with since they've been pregnant.
Well, I have a lot of situations in which I couldn't deal with my big belly. You know, I mean, I remember that me and my husband were taking salsa classes at one point, and we were supposed, he was supposed to spin me somehow, and then I couldn't keep my postures. So obviously the mass that I was having in front of my body affected that.
That's right.
And we decided to stop taking salsa classes at that time. Thank you so much for all the suggestions and advices that you have provided. I wish I could hear your presentation before I even got pregnant, because it makes a lot of sense, you know? It does make a lot of sense, Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your participation too. I'm just gonna wait a couple of seconds to see if there is a question in the group chat, which is gonna give it some seconds to see. And I guess there is none. And just following up your presentation in one of your slides that spoke about the maternity belt, we are happy to announce the person who has won the raffle. Her name is Stephanie Opin. So she's gonna be having a maternity belt. So I'm gonna be in contact with her. And thank you so much for everybody for being present in here. And we're gonna be posting this video and also the presentations in our Women in STEM website. I'm gonna be sharing my screen for a couple of minutes just to show where is that going to be. And please help support our organization too. We are planning to have another family building workshop in November 25th, and we're gonna be sending more information. And well, thank you everybody, have a wonderful day, and thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.